Hello and welcome to another PowerPoint lecture for Art 15 or Art 3, depending on the school you are currently enrolled in. I'm going to talk about this new concept here called emphasis and focal point. Um, just to backtrack, we have done quite a few projects where we are playing around with space, we are learning how to incorporate these elements and principles of design into your work. Sometimes they feel more laborly than, say, producing a beautiful masterpiece. They're more about exercises and more about helping you actually see things a little bit differently. And so I hope that this principle of design becomes quite useful. So just to start off, we are going to talk about what a focal point is. That is the point of emphasis in an image or a design. And if you look at this work of art here by Suzanne Jane Welp, Grapefruit with Black Ribbons, made in 2000, you might right away be able to point out what the focal point of this work of art may be. You can ask yourself, how does this become the focal point? How is it so, in a way, easily recognizable? Well, first of all, the color sticks out. It's this yellow fruit in the middle of a relatively dark background. And there are many other reasons that can add to this, but let's go ahead and talk about just the focal point by itself. The element emphasized in a picture can attract attention and encourage the viewer to look further. And so, just a thought, there are hundreds and thousands of images in front of us every day. So in order to catch the attention of the viewer, try using a strong focal point. Okay, so we are living in a age where we are basically bombarded with images, especially now during this time of quarantine, probably spending more time in front of the computer or maybe more time in front of the television. And so we are bombarded with these images. How do we get to a point where we are noticing something relatively different from everything else is that we try to look for a certain focal point, okay? And so let's take a look at this work here by Henry Matisse. I hope that you guys remember this artist because this is the same artist that did those paper cutouts that made very large exhibitions, early 1900s, and that he was very successful. He was more successful in those paper cutouts than his actual paintings. And so when it comes to the focal point for emphasis, there can be more than one focal point in a picture. There doesn't, in many cases, we like to look for that one thing that sticks out. But in some works of art, there can be more than one. And so if we take a look at this piece here, a second focal point might be referred to as an accent or counterpoint. Too many points of focus can lead to visual confusion. And that is an interesting point here. Something that I notice when it comes to many student artists is they try to focus too much on detail. They want to make everything look clear. They want to make everything look sharp and accurate. But when that happens too many times, that's when you know they are in a way control of their composition, but it's not exactly what people enjoy. Okay, so abstracts and patterns can also have focal points. So not only do the more representational works of art have focal points, but also the abstracts, the more abstract works of art. Okay, so here is an interesting quote. When everything is emphasized, nothing is emphasized. Okay, so remember that. And so there are different ways to achieve emphasis. And here are some of the easier ways. One is by contrast. We can create emphasis by contrast. If you look at this work of art here, the first thing that I think is very high, strong contrast, and that is due to the relatively dark overall composition, yet in the center, we are seeing a subtle collection of very strong highlighted areas. Will Bingley, 2010, from Gonzo, a graphic biography of Hunter S. Thompson. Very cool. This looks like a image from a comic book, which it probably is. And so we can create emphasis by contrast. So we're looking at very drastic changes in value. So wherever you see strong lights and strong darks together, you can right away say there's very strong contrast. Okay, there's another way to achieve emphasis, which is through isolation. And if we were to look at the figure in the very center here, that he is almost directly in the center, and that is the only figure that I am seeing. There's no other people around him. He is also surrounded by that light, which isn't incorporated, in which shadows aren't incorporated too much by the surrounding objects. So he feels very isolated, and right away it's creating a very strong point of emphasis. Okay, and so when it comes to achieving emphasis, here is a list of ways to achieve that. Okay, so you can isolate one element, you can change the direction of shapes or lines, you can make one element distorted or vice versa. You could change the size of an object, you could change the shape of an object. The shapes can be either geometric or organic. You can change the color of one object, or you can actually change the brightness of one object. So there are many ways. These are just a list of some, but there are so many ways you can create a type of emphasis. Okay, and so a little bit more info on emphasis by contrast. When a majority of the elements are black and white, color will stand out. Okay, so this is something that you could think about when it comes to your overall projects. And this work of art here, Thomas Noskowski, Untitled, 2006. For some reason, the image on the left is not showing up. George Stubbs Zebra 1763. So if you guys can look it up somehow, Google it, your best friend, you can see some examples of contrast. I think that I might have added contrast, this zebra image on an upcoming assignment. Okay, so whenever the majority of elements are black and white, color stands out. That's pretty easy to remember. Okay, another emphasis, again, by isolation. Take the repetition of the same object over and over and have just one of these off by itself. Okay, so it's almost similar to what we explained earlier. And I am looking at the Paul Scher design here. Okay, and so there seems to be a focal point in that. And to me, it's more about the center image, that it feels very isolated in comparison to the eye and the heart that is relatively above the object. The change in shape causes for that, it looks like the Empire State Building, to be isolated, to be emphasized. And with the painting, the Agnew Clinic 1889 by Thomas Eakins, of course, the use of isolation through this chiaroscuro, this light and dark effect happening throughout the whole piece. in the negative space, we see many figures, all leading towards the subjects that seem to be towards the front. And not only are these subjects closer to the viewer, but they're also highlighted upon. There are lights shining upon them from different angles. The colors are even more vibrant than the colors in the negative space. So there's a very strong use of isolation here. Very interesting piece. This came from the Baroque period, sometime around in between the 1600s and 1800s. Baroque is one of the classic genres of art, one of my favorite genres of art. And this looks exactly like a work of art that came from the Baroque period. Okay, it is important not to place the point of focus too close to the edge, as it will pull the viewer's eye out of the picture. And so if you want to make a focal point occur within your work of art, you want to stay not really in the exact center, but somewhere in the center. If you put it too close to the side, it's gonna pull the viewer out of the picture. So you want to keep them in a way within the not the exact center, but somewhere around there. Okay, and so now we're going to talk about emphasis by placement. When all the lines point across, as in an axis, perspective line, or radial design, the focal point will be that point. So we have these lines that are actually guiding us towards a particular area. In other words, a placement object can lead the viewer's eye to what you want them to notice. Our eyes are drawn to the L because it's near the center. So if we look at this work here, Adam and Eve, Lucas Cranach the Elder, 1526. The apple is in the very center, and since the artist placed this apple in the very center, it becomes the focal point. And of course, we have Adam and Eve directly in the vicinity of the apple, so they too are within the focal point. Okay, so sometimes the object is somewhere near the center. That makes it somewhere easy to find. And that if you look at the tree, of course, the tree, the very important tree in the story of Adam and Eve, it is creating almost a division within the overall composition, making an axis. And right within that space, we see the apple, which is, of course, the focal point of the overall composition. With this work here, the Vermeer, a lady at the virginals with a gentleman, the music lesson. Here, the lines are causing the focal point. And so we are looking at the perspective lines. So if you guys can see, let me see if I can bring up my little, whoops. Let's see if I can bring in my, okay, it's not supposed to do this. Let me go back. Okay, editing will occur. Maybe, or maybe not. So let's see. So where is my tools? Is my tools section somewhere? Here, yes. So I just had to leave my finger on the tablet. So I have my little red dot here. If you guys are seeing this line here, this perspective line, and then we are seeing this perspective line there. It is in a way guiding us to this focal point here. I'm having fun with this. Okay. And so that's another way to create emphasis through the use of perspective lines or linear, any type of linear guide. Okay. Okay, so thoughts on where to place the focal point, and I hinted on some of this already. Try not to use the dead center of the picture. It is called the dead center for a reason. That's really interesting. It's called dead center. because it doesn't give off any attention if it's too much in the center there. Try not to put the focal point too close to the edge of the picture, or it will pull the viewer's eye off the page. We mentioned that a little bit earlier. Have something like the gaze or direction of the object pointing back into the composition. And this is a little bit tricky. This is when you are incorporating the figure somehow, you have people in your composition, and that if they are looking a particular direction, viewers have a tendency to follow whatever that direction may be. So for the artists, the architects of their own works, they want for the viewer to feel engaged. So when they incorporate figures, they try to, what their goal is to have the viewer look at the work as long as they can possibly keep them there. And if they say use a figure and they are looking away from the center, they are looking away from some points of interest throughout the overall composition, then there's a feeling of disinterest, because we have a tendency to sympathize with the figures. If they are looking away, you know, we might think, you know, yeah, I'll look away too. So it's really interesting how us as humans, we sympathize with the figure, even if it's just a drawing or if it's just a painting. So if you do have the figure incorporated somehow in your overall composition, if you can have them in a way gaze towards a direction where you would rather have the viewer, say, interact with the space, that's, you want to follow that. You want to guide the viewer, bring them back into the center, bring them back to the point of interest, which is generally around the middle, but not exactly the middle. One thing that I like to do is I try to bounce back and forth. So, you know, start from the lower left, you know, then you go to the upper right corner, you know, you can make like an X. You know, it's very different ways to think about it. And so for many artists, especially if you are, say that you are a student artist and that you're learning all of these different design principles, you probably don't really think about things like that. I know that for sure, because I was like that. I'm still like that sometimes. But now that I'm aware of it, then I can use this into my own work, and I can produce some stronger works of art that incorporate the figure, and that I can find a way to make my overall composition a little bit more interesting. Okay, and so here we're going to talk about some different degree of emphasis. A specific theme may at times call for a dominant, even visually overwhelming focal point, such as the subject that we are looking at here, Maurice Vellecoupe, Christian Dior, Boutique Valentino, November, December 1997. So it looks like a magazine cover of some sort. And so we can ask ourselves, what is the most interesting things of this picture? We're probably looking at the figures in the center, the male and the female, and how they are wearing these very bright colors, especially the yellow. To me, the yellow is very bright and very vivid. The beige is a little bit on the pastel side, so the vibrancy isn't all there, but still he's within that vicinity of where the focal point may be. So when it comes to something like this, it is a image used in a magazine cover. So they want to attract the attention of anyone walking by. They want them to look at the magazine, notice it, and perhaps purchase it. So sometimes you want to exaggerate that emphasis. Okay, and here the artist is maintaining unity with a focal point. So we talked a little bit about unity during the last chapter. I hope this is going to add on to what you guys are already doing. Okay, the focal point should remain related to and part of the overall design. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the absence of a focal point. And if we take a look at this image here, this poster, Shaz Mavain Davies, IUCN Annual Report 1998, yes, 90. So this work of art here has an absence of focal point. Part of us can say that perhaps the face of the zebra might be a focal point, yet the surrounding elements don't exactly allude us to the idea that that's the only, the strongest, say, area within the whole composition, because everything is very evenly distributed. I could say that the hair on the back, or even the curve on the body, feels very dominant, yet I'm being distracted by the thumbnail and whatever's happening in the negative space. So it feels like a true loss of focal point here, okay? And so when it comes to this absence of a focal point, we emphasize the whole over the parts. So you're not just doing what I was trying to do, where I want to say just the face of the focal point. I can't, because I'm so easily distracted by some of these strong elements that are surrounding that subject. Sometimes you can draw attention to a design simply by not using a focal point, okay? So don't create emphasis, purposely find ways to exclude that particular area. Use of emphasizing the entire surface of a composition over any individual elements. So yes, try not to make anything stand out. That's actually a lot more difficult than it sounds, okay? And so that is it for this week's chapter. Very short, very quick to the point, and actually very informational. So I hope that you guys got something out of that. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Good luck on your projects.